Hey everyone!
In this video, we're going to build a custom password input using React and Tailwind CSS, complete with show hide toggle, validation, and smooth styling. Let's jump right in.
I'm going to start by creating a new React project using Vite. This'll be quick. Once that's done, we'll jump straight into building our component. Now that the project is set up, let's open it in our code editor. I'm using vscode, but feel free to use whatever you prefer. Inside the project, we'll clean up some of the default files and get ready to build our custom password input component. All right, let's clean up the boilerplate so we can start with a blank canvas. I'm clearing out everything inside app.jsx, removing the default styles from both app.css and index.css, and deleting any files we don't need. This gives us a completely fresh setup. Now we're ready to start building our custom password input from scratch. Before we run the project, let's install the dependencies we'll need. We'll be using Tailwind CSS for styling and React icons to add that clean eye toggle for our password input. Once everything's installed and configured, we'll start building the UI. Now that everything's set up, let's run the project. As you can see, it's up and running in the browser, clean and ready to go. Let's move on and start building our custom password input component. Next, inside the src directory, I'm creating a new folder called Components. This is where we'll keep all our reusable components. Inside that folder, I'm creating a file called input.jsx. This will contain the main logic and UI for our custom password input field. Let's jump into the code and start building it out. Inside input.jsx, I'm using the ravce snippet. If you have the ES7 plus React snippets extension installed, this will quickly generate a functional component for us. This gives us a nice placeholder to start from. Now let's head over to app.jsx and import our input component. I'll replace everything in app.jsx with just our input component so we can see it directly in the browser. On the UI, we can now see that our input.jsx component is rendered. Everything's working as expected, so we're good to go. Let's start building out the actual password input functionality. Before we move into the input.jsx file, let's quickly update our layout. I'm going into index.css and giving HTML, body, and number root a height of 100%. This ensures our component can take up the full height of the screen, which will be useful for centering and styling later. Before we dive into building the input, let's make the UI look a bit cleaner. In app.jsx, I'm adding some Tailwind classes to center the input both vertically and horizontally, and give the page a subtle background. This helps us focus on the component without any visual distractions, and it already looks more polished. Now finally, let's move into input.jsx and start building our custom password input. We'll begin by adding a basic input field, then we'll enhance it step by step with features like show, hide functionality, icons, and Tailwind styling to make it look sharp and responsive. Let's get started. Let's start by importing all the icons we'll need. I'm bringing in the lock icon from React icons/phi to visually represent the password field, and the eye and eye off icons from React icons/io to toggle password visibility. These icons will help enhance the user experience by making the input more interactive and intuitive. I've added a wrapper div to structure the layout of our input field, and I'm applying Tailwind CSS classes to style it. This includes setting a max width, centering the component horizontally, adding some margin from the top, and giving it padding and a nice rounded border. Next, I've added a div that acts as the main container for our password input field. I'm using Tailwind classes to make it flexible and visually appealing. It's a flex container to align items horizontally, with some padding, a subtle border, and a white background. I've also added rounded corners, a soft shadow by default, and a smooth hover effect that adds depth. Inside this styled container, I'm adding a lock icon at the start. This helps indicate to the user that this field is for entering a password. I'm using the lock icon and giving it a fixed size of 20 pixels along with a muted gray color using Tailwind's Text Gray 400 class. This small visual cue adds to the clarity and improves the overall user experience. Next, I'm adding the actual input element. I've set the type to text for now, and added a placeholder that says, "Enter your password." Styling-wise, I've made it take full width, removed the default outline, and set the text and placeholder colors using Tailwind classes, keeping everything clean, minimal, and easy to read. To allow users to toggle the visibility of their password, I'm creating a visible state using the useState hook. This state will help us switch the input type between password and text, giving users the option to see what they're typing, which is especially helpful for avoiding mistakes while entering passwords. Now I'm adding a button element at the end of the input container. This will act as our toggle for showing or hiding the password. Inside this button, I'm conditionally rendering the eye or eye off icon based on the visible state. If the password is visible, we show the open eye icon. Otherwise, we show the crossed-out eye. This gives users a clear and intuitive way to control the visibility of their password, all with just a click. I'm setting the button's type to button. This is important to prevent it from accidentally submitting a form. Then I'm styling it with Tailwind classes to give it a muted gray color by default, and a smooth hover effect that transitions to a subtle green. This keeps the toggle icon consistent with the rest of our UI and adds a nice interactive touch. Now, we'll update the input element to conditionally render its type based on the visible state. If the visible state is true, the input type will be set to text, allowing the user to see their password. If it's false, it will be set back to password to hide the input. This logic ensures that when the user clicks the eye icon, they can toggle between viewing and hiding their password. Next, let's handle user input by creating a function to manage changes in the password field. I'm using the useState hook to create two pieces of state, one for the input value and another for tracking any validation errors. In the handle change function, we update the input value with each keystroke. Then, we check if the input is less than 6 characters. If it is, we set an error message. Password must contain at least 6 characters. If the input is valid, we clear the error. This helps guide users by providing instant feedback on their password strength and ensures that the input meets the minimum requirements. Now, let's create the function to toggle the visibility of the password. I'm using a simple function called toggle visibility. Inside this function, I toggle the visible state using the setVisible function from useState. Now, let's wire up everything by attaching our functions to the respective events. Finally, we need to provide feedback to the user in case the password doesn't meet the required criteria. If there's an error in the input, like when the password is too short, I'm rendering an error message below the input field. Now, Let's improve the user experience even further by providing visual feedback based on the password input's validity. I'm using a conditional Tailwind class to change the border color of the input field when there's an error. If there's a validation error, the border turns red using the focus within ring red 500 class. If there's no error, the border will remain blue, thanks to the focus within ring blue 400 class. This subtle visual cue helps users easily spot issues with their password input. Now let's move to the browser. You can see our input. It's looking good and ready to use. So let's go ahead and test it out. You can see when I type a password with less than 6 characters, it shows an error message below and also changes the border color to red, giving clear feedback to the user. And now you can see, when I type a password with more than 6 characters, the error disappears and the border color goes back to normal. Let's try toggling the eye icon, and you can see it's working perfectly. We can show and hide the password just like that. Oh, I almost forgot. Let's add a label to our input field. Right at the top, I'll add a label that says password to make it clear what this input is for. Let's also add some styles to the label, just to make it look clean and consistent with the rest of the UI. And now you can see on the UI, our input is ready to use and looks great with the label added.
That's it! We've built a fully functional and stylish password input. If you found this helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. See you in the next one.